Yeah, I'm setting it up.
Yeah, I haven't heard from Ian in a little bit. I was wondering if he'd be able to join, but I guess he hasn't had a chance to watch it.
Hasn't.
I mean, I haven't heard from him. I don't think he's seen our messages. So,
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's up with him. Maybe he's busy or something.
oh,
We'll ask him. I actually watched it with him, so but not just him. So I didn't even get the chance, I don't think, to even talk to him about the movie. So it would be like just watching it with like talking with you, because I don't think we even it was a lot of people. It was like 17 people. But let me start then.
okay.
Let's all right. So now we're recording. And tonight we're going to talk about Dune. We haven't done any of these podcasts for quite a while, so I think this is a good occasion, right, Daniel? Because
Yeah.
it's a great movie, it's a great event. In any case,
Yeah.
it's a huge event. It's almost like going back to movies in general, because it's the first movie that is really like making waves again since this whole thing started almost.
Yeah. I mean, it was, well, not my first movie in theaters this year was definitely the biggest one. Uh, well, I take it back. Demon Slayer might still be the movie that makes the most money on the year, but the Dune definitely is, I think, the bigger event, given the history behind it, and given the hope I think Warner Brothers has for it. Which, um, but yeah, no, it's
Well, it's kind of ironic, right? Because in a sense, because Warner Brothers was a little bit cowardly or overly cautious with Dune, that they didn't want to commit to filming, two or three movies right away. And we really didn't know until recently if we're gonna get a part two
right.
even. But this was all before the pandemic. So, the movie's now being released, yeah, it's not like the middle of the pandemic, but like in a very different situation, much worse situation now. A lot fewer people going to movies, but at the same time, it doesn't even seem like it mattered. Like people are going to watch this movie. I guess it would have been a tremendous success if this were the case now, but it's making a lot of, I mean, it not a lot of money, but it's making a very good amount of money.
Yeah, I think it's doing really well, and I think we should caveat from all the talk is that Warner Brothers was like they knew that they were like 95% sure they were going to have a second movie. They just didn't want to film both. I mean, Danny Villeneuve starts the movie off with part one, like that would be pretty ballsy to.
I think Villeneuve and Warner Brothers are not completely in agreement, though. Like, because he has said, like, even if you read his interviews before, he always said that he wanted to do part two and potentially even a part three.
Yeah,
But Warner Brothers never really, obviously they wanted to, but they never committed to it.
right. I mean, and Warner Brothers has a track with this. I mean, they did that with initially there were going to be two Justice League movies.
Yeah,
They were
that's an example. Yeah.
yeah, and
Well, it wasn't as bad as this case, because in this case it would have been really, I mean, just ridiculous. You watch
well,
a half a movie and then you don't even make the second part. I mean, that
yeah,
would be, I think people would get pretty mad.
yeah, I would argue it's to me it's kind of funny because Dune is infinitely harder to film than making a good comic book movie, in my opinion, these days. I mean, there's another. So I feel like Villeneuve's accomplishment with this is pretty striking. I mean, there's weaknesses. We can get into that. But I think the
But
result
what?
of,
Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
I would say the result of this, like especially for me, experiencing it in IMAX, like I was pretty enthralled. I went into that movie actually pretty exhausted too. It had been a long day for me, but
Was it
I
after work or something?
No, I had just done a lot of physically exhausting stuff that day.
Tennis.
Yeah, and I I sit down and it starts get takes a little bit to get going. Some of that early stuff, particularly the stuff on Kaladin and all that, is
Yeah.
added in, isn't in the book, and so it takes a while to get to the meat of the movie.
Yeah.
Uh, but the world building itself is enthralling enough, at least to someone like who enjoys the source material, who enjoys the themes and stuff they take from it. So it kept me like I was like, okay, this experience in theater was worth it to go. Um, you know, obviously, like we can talk about the other stuff later, but like,
So let me ask you, this isn't related to Dune, but I'm curious now. So what movies? Because for me, I didn't even watch, and this is another thing we can talk about. I didn't even watch the movie in theaters, but for you, so you said it wasn't the first movie that you saw in theaters. Which movies did you see this year?
I only saw one other movie. Me and Ian went and saw Demon
Oh, okay.
Slayer.
Yeah,
The-
I know that you saw that one, but I thought, maybe you watched more. So that was the only one. And that one was in what, in August or something like that, July?
that was in the spring, actually.
Oh, it was,
Maybe it was in June. But
yeah,
I I was like, this thing's become a phenomenal, phenom, like international hit. So, as someone who enjoyed that first season of the show, I really wanted to experience it in theater and see if it was up to it. And there are some things that are just really fun to watch on a big screen and in person. And
of course, yeah.
I
Is
think
that
after
is that is that part of the TV show, or is that like sort of like a side story?
it's part of the canon story. They're actually re-airing it now in an episodic format as a part of the second season.
Okay.
Um,
So it's kind of a sequel to the first season.
yeah, it's a continuation.
It's a
Uh,
continuation.
but
I'll try to watch that show because yeah, you guys were really excited about it, and the only thing I did was adding it to my Netflix watch list, which is composed at this point of about 200 different TV shows and movies.
we're all the same on that end.
So I will never get through all of that, but I have to select very carefully what I watch.
Yeah, no, I think like with all things, like you might like it, you might not. The people
Yeah,
that I saw Dune with, for example, like a lot of like half
yeah.
of
Let's go back to the Dune. So who did you watch it with?
So I went with Lauren, who's also read the book. Um, the one who organized it with is a climbing friend of mine, and it was his birthday, and so it was his wife, and then a mutual friend of ours who really enjoys the series, and his wife, and a couple of other people we knew. And
It
so,
was a big group. How many?
yeah,
Like eight, 10 people. It was a big group.
9 people, yeah,
Wow.
um, yeah,
It's
and
almost like the sort of like the Fellowship of the Ring
yeah,
expedition or something like that. Eight,
right.
nine
We
people.
can make some parallels into Lord of the Rings later as well.
Yeah.
Although really the parallel literature to this is Foundation. I can talk about that later too. Um, but I mean, most of us, I think, at least were lukewarm on it. We had one person who absolutely hated it.
Uh-huh.
Um,
So yeah, how was the reaction in your group? How was the reaction to the movie, and how's your reaction to the movie as well?
um, I would say about half liked it. I was more on the side of liking it. Um, I had quibbles thinking like maybe this would have worked a little, certain things would have worked a little bit better if they had cut some things out. But in on the level, I liked it. Lauren liked it. Um, the birthday the birthday guy and his friend, and our mutual friend liked it
Yeah.
as well. But we had one person who didn't like it at all, and you know,
Did
I would
did he
say that.
say did he say why?
Well, she part of it was that like she felt like not a lot happened and it was long and just took too much. And I think that for some people, they're going to feel that way. because there's a lot of world building. There's a lot of, and there's not a lot of complexity of character just yet.
Yeah.
Like, one thing that was cut that maybe detracted from that, that would have maybe added some flavor to the Harkonnens was the other nephew, um, the one played by Sting in the
Yes, which he's a pretty important character. It's a little bit bizarre that he wasn't in the movie.
right. I'm wondering if he's being held back for the second part.
Well, I'm sure he'll appear in the second part because he's a pretty
Same,
important character. But it's bizarre that he didn't make the first movie.
right. And the princess isn't in there either, and she's the narrator of the book.
Yeah,
And so there's characters that aren't in it that I think would have added a flavor of complexity to the narrative.
yeah, I
But
agree.
the stuff they did add to flesh out more scenes, I think are set up. This is why I think we've discussed this offline before, that this maybe would have been better off as a miniseries,
Yeah,
but it in general, I feel like the world building stuff they added was good and beneficial, but it does mean it takes a long time to get to certain things.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, like I would. So I watched it with 17 people,
yeah,
and instead of going to the theater, and this is a testament to how well the movie is doing, is that we all watched it on HBO Max. We watched in basically a home theater. We
right.
watched in someone's house, and he has a pretty cool setup with a projector. I'll take you there sometime. He's a friend of mine, so we should watch a couple of movies at his place. It's a cool place. And Ian came with me. Hopefully he'll be, if no one else watches our podcast, maybe Ian will.
Yeah.
and and we watched it together. But there were 17 people, so there was a lot of interest, and some people that there were university girls and stuff that you talk to them, they weren't really interested in sci-fi. They didn't really know, because I kind of sort of like surveyed people before the movie started, just so I and after, just to get an idea if people were familiar with the story. And they most people weren't really like sci-fi
Yeah.
fans, and didn't really know a whole lot about Dune. So, but it had this movie. It's kind of like these events, the event movies, right? It has that kind of like quality to it. And I don't know if it's because of the pandemic, because we haven't had a lot of movies come out. Maybe it is, or maybe it's just because Warner Brothers was good at marketing it, and the images themselves, they're naturally beautiful and epic. I'm not really sure.
Well, I would say the thing is that the way we can relate to this is Lord of the Rings is that, yeah, Lord of the Rings is fantasy. Yes, this is sci-fi, but there's enduring themes in both works that make them like really resonate outside of their genre. Now, granted, Lord of the Rings is a wider like appeal base. It's
Yeah,
more people have,
it has a lot more name recognition, I think.
right. But Dune, and I feel like my hope is this is actually encourage people to read Dune, because particularly even even if just the first book.
Yeah, I was surprised that like I told you, I watched it with 17 people. I think just one of those people had read the book before, or a couple. Like it's not a lot, and it's really I don't think there is one sci-fi novel that is more classic than this one. Perhaps 1984, which is almost a different genre, but
Right, and then you have Foundation, which again is a different series, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But I think, I mean, even at the time, Dune was considered a little weird, and I think partially due to the times, Herbert really, um, he really drew inspiration from a lot of different sources. But some of the stuff that appealed to someone like me, a lot of the iconography and wording and sense and setting draws heavily on Middle Eastern influences. I mean, there's words just straight taken and used that are Arabic in origin. And even his editor at the time was like, "What's with all this Islam stuff?" And Herbert was like, "This is there's a lot of these themes of environmentalism, imperialism, like it's very like these are and it's wrapped up in an iconography that doesn't get a lot of play often, and he was able to weave a very interesting narrative from it, and so it's always had for me personally a bit of connection with that. But I
Well,
still the
a
themes of
lot, a lot of these fantasy and sci-fi shows or movies, or books, they draw from real life cultures, right? And I think in Dune's case, it's clearly the Middle Eastern culture that is the source.
right, and even just the battling over like there's so much there that's used, and then the wrapping it in with like the environmentalism, ecology, and then like Herbert himself, more than a lot of other writers, was very interested in the idea of the emergence of a hero, and also duality as well. I guess that's why I kind of like Timothy Chalamet as Paul Atreides, a male character who is actually supposed to inhabit a lot of the female powers, that that were traditionally like there was the whole deal with that, and so there's very much a narrative in there for people. And that when you look back, like Herbert might not have been ahead of his time intentionally,
Mhm.
but there's um, a lot of area in here to work with on like gender as well, like the whole like fluidity of it for, and again, like Chalamet kind of makes an interesting sort of vector for that because he's got very like, you know, he's got such ability to be a commanding act, like well, that's not a great way to put it, but like I felt like if they weren't going to cast somebody who was non-binary, then
Yeah.
or younger even, because isn't he supposed to be 15 at the start of book of Dune?
I I think it's possible, but it's also true that the movie, not the movie, sorry, the novel takes place. So what? Well, the story takes
Like
place over.
many
Uh,
years.
yeah, I don't remember how many years
So
exactly,
he'll
but
he'll look the right age. And
yeah, I think you can't do it perfectly, right? It's no matter who you cast, but I think he's young enough that
yeah,
he looks the part, and also, I mean, a 15-year-old wouldn't necessarily look right, if you look too young. So I think he looks just the right age, actually. Which is it's different from I watched in preparation for this. I watched the David Lynch movie, and I'm glad I did because yeah, because do you remember that movie or did
yeah.
you watch it? Yeah.
With Kyle MacLachlan as he was one of David Lynch's favorite actors, but like he was not cast correctly
The main
at all.
character is definitely not, it doesn't feel right because he's too old. He feels like he looks like a man, like a full-fledged, and he probably was that age, like he was probably in his 30s or something like that, I imagine, or
Right.
like late 20s, but he looks like a man, and not so much as a young savior, which is Paul Atreides' character. So
Man.
it looked
David
very much off, the casting in general, I gotta say, I think is very good in this movie. That the cast is extremely strong, and
this
it's
this
one of the highlights of the movie. And it's one of the ways in which this movie is so much better than the 80s movie, the David Lynch's movie. The
by
casting is so
far
much better. Yeah, it's
casting
by
is
far.
really good. My only quibbles are that Oscar Isaac and like they're good actor. Like I like him, but him and shoot, what's the name of the actress who plays his mom? I felt like they were a little too young to play his parents. She's only like 13 years older than him as an
Mhm.
actress, and so
I'm not so sure. I mean, I understand that, but I didn't feel that way. I mean, they're not that young, Like I think they're like in their 40s, both of them.
right. Well, she's 37.
Okay,
Timothy Chalamet
but
is
she can pass for 40 something. I would
maybe,
say.
maybe, but like that was my only quibble on casting.
Yeah,
It
fair enough.
big
Fair enough.
issue.
I
Um,
think they also cast her because she's Bene Gesserit's. I don't know if this is the reason. I mean, they probably just wanted a pretty face, but Bene Gesserits are supposed to be, they're kind of special as well. You know, they have like some powers. They're particularly sensual, but at the same time they're commending, you know. So I don't think there's one way to represent that, but in the novel, you know, obviously you get the idea that they're not your common folk, you know, like they're, you can
right.
choose to represent them in a number of ways, but you can always make the argument that yeah, she's not an ordinary woman, right?
Well, and just as a random aside, we are going to get a TV series on HBO on the Bene Gesserit, so which
Yeah.
is cool. But yeah, no, cat. This is if we're going to start off like on the first main highlight of this movie, it would definitely be the cast. I feel was extremely well done. Um, and
Yeah,
just like
the casting, I would really, I have no problems with the casting. I think it's a very, very strong cast.
right. It's to the point where some characters were so good in their role, I almost didn't recognize them when they showed up. Like Javier Bardem,
It was
as
really good, yeah.
yeah, like at first, like I remember, like when he shows back up again, I was like, wait, this has been Javier Bardem the whole movie. I did not like. I like was like, wow, I almost couldn't see that. Uh,
I recognized him, but it was not easy. You know, it was like he was very well disguised.
right, and even just like the smaller characters, like seeing David Dastalmachian, he played the Harkonnen little like assistant guy,
Yeah.
and like I was like, holy crap, that is him. Um, and yeah, no, just overall, just really good cast. And
I think every single, if you compare it to the original movie, every single one of them are better.
right, I mean, sometimes it's just depending on also how your interpretation of the character is. Like this is a
Well,
very
except Sting, right? Because
yeah,
he's MIA. So
yeah,
and Sting was actually a highlight of the original. So
he was.
yeah, so Sting like gained some points for the '80s movie.
But like I was in, but certain things are also reinterpretation. Like Baron Harkonnen is a lot different, really portrayal. I enjoyed this interpretation of him,
Yeah,
but he's different than he is in the book. In the book, he's a lot more scheming.
yeah.
He's less quiet. But I think this is Bennett Villeneuve even said he wanted to have more of a quiet menace of a villain,
Hmm.
and he cut out some of the other not savory aspects of his penchant for boys,
Right.
which
Which
is
is
not necessary.
which
It's a good choice to leave that out.
well, it is present in the '80s version.
Yeah,
Both things actually, and I actually think that you don't need to portray things exactly how they are in the book. I think
right.
this version is actually a much better version.
It's
Like
menacing. Like
the
when he
yeah, it's
drives up
menacing.
and he's just like quiet and he does Stellan Skarsgård does so much with so little in terms of just using his eyes and
Yeah.
that like you feel that. But because of that, I think we do miss having the other nephew
Hmm.
to add to
No, absolutely. I mean, the nephew, I think I don't understand why he wasn't included, but yeah, I think that was a mistake. But the Baron, I think he's actually a
yeah,
better version of that character. Even though it departs more from the book than the '80s version, actually, I
yeah,
think this is a much better version.
yeah, I agree. And because in certain things are gonna have to be updated. This is an old book. Um, Peter Jackson updated things for the Lord of the Rings movies. I mean, the hobbits weren't these little fat, curly haired like creatures. They were, you know,
Yeah.
kind of handsome young little hair. The only one kind of matched that was Sam.
Hmm.
You know,
Yes. And they were pretty good. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to read the books and not to think of the actors in the movies right now, right? Because they're so
yeah.
good as the Four Hobbits.
Right. And so like, but there's always reasons to update, and especially for older texts like this. And so yeah, like interpretations like that. Um, Trying to think what else did
I think beating Sting is going to be difficult because it's Sting, you know.
well, we have to see who they cast. Like,
Yeah, but
there's
that
good
that
actors out there, and if they
there's
can
good
find
actors.
someone who can pull it off, I'll be hoping. I mean, Villeneuve has a good track record, I think, on putting together movies and finding actors um, for roles, but we'll see. That's going to be an interesting. I'm trying to think other changes. I mean, I feel like giving more for his mom to do in this was
Rebe-
also, I think, a good choice.
Rebecca
Expanding some of the
Ferguson.
women characters,
Yeah.
um, and even changing the. I feel like there's updates that made a lot of sense to in this sense, and also giving Duncan Idaho a more badass exit. You know,
Yeah, and he's a lot better. I mean, the 80s version
oh, that was awful.
that is very bad actually. That he's one of the worst adaptations in that movie. Like that character really gets butchered in that movie. And this one is very good. I mean, but Jason Momoa, to be honest, I mean, he's very good, you know.
I mean, he's the
If you
perfect guy
want a
for us.
badass character in a movie and you cast Jason Momoa, I think it's very difficult to go wrong there.
Yeah, and it's like, but that's why I said like they had to give him a more badass out because you can't cast Aquaman and Khal Drogo and have him go out like quickly or off screen or something. You know, you have
Yeah.
to give him a lot more to do. Um, I will say it's kind of hilarious to see the memes and the Twitter mentions as a lot of Americans who hadn't read Dune were like, really, the most badass person's name is Duncan Idaho, and a lot of international folks are like, what's wrong with that? We don't get it because they don't, Americans are thinking he's named after a state. That's weird.
Yeah.
And then most people are like, but what about Indiana Jones? Same thing.
You know, I mean, maybe because I'm not American. I don't know. I think it's a great name. I mean,
Right.
I think
But
I think
like,
it's really cool.
but it was trending hard on Twitter. We were like, the most badass guy in the universe name is Duncan Idaho. I'm like,
I think it's a pretty cool name, to be honest with you. Dunk.
yeah, no,
What do you think? What do you think?
I think it's great.
I think
Um,
it's a great name.
again, I equate it with Indiana Jones if we're
Yeah,
okay with
Indiana
that.
Jones is a fantastic name.
Right.
I think state names are good names for people, apparently.
Right. And
I mean, how many names are better than Indiana Jones? You know, very few. Like in the history of cinema.
but so let's talk about something that's always important to Dune and how it's handled is the sandworms. We didn't get a lot
Yeah,
of them, but I really liked this interpretation. The David Lynch movie ones were kind of weird.
yeah.
Some people would say they kind of looked phallic. Um,
Yeah, I was okay with it. I think it's also a matter of like I don't know if budget is the word because I don't know what the budget was for that movie. I know for this movie they had a lot of budget, but I mean visually there's no comparison really between the 80s and this version. I mean this is I mean that's other than the cast. I think that's actually the strongest suit of the movie
oh yeah,
is visually it's a marvel, you know. It's a marvelous. It's a work of art, you know, like visually, right?
which
So
which Denny Villeneuve, like he's always
it's a strong
visually
suit, you know,
stunning.
as a director, and it really shows, you know. It's there are some directors that are more visual, you know, like Zack Snyder. He's known for his visuals.
Yeah,
Villeneuve, the same thing, you know, like they're just even like Fincher to a certain extent. There's some directors that have a very characteristic visual style, and this is Villeneuve, yeah, for sure. I mean,
his is more of a pondering visual. He does it.
yeah,
I mean, even with like Arrival and all that, he really likes to dwell on shots and extend them with the actors to like do to pan to just like really allow them a moment. This might be why the like the one person we watched it with was like things just took forever. We got a lot of those like
it's
sort of
it's almost like a thoughtful Christopher Nolan, you
yeah.
know.
Although Christopher Nolan is like, yeah, because everything is quick cuts.
Yeah, Christopher Nolan is more like fast, but Villeneuve is like it kind of looks like Christopher Nolan, but like sort of like Christopher Nolan if he's had a lot to drink the night before, so he's like
Right.
taking his time in the morning, like having some coffee, just chilling. So that's Villeneuve. Just yeah, he sits on these beautiful shots instead of um you know following one shot with another. He just like gives you the same thing, and then he adds a little bit of mood music. I think the music was a little bit too much, to be honest. I think that was kind of a problem. I think it was
Imagine with the huge speakers and IMAX blaring on us. It was pretty loud.
yeah. What did you think? I think that was a little bit overkill. I mean, it was good, but it was a little bit too repetitive and constant. And it's a long movie. It's like 2.5 hours long. And I felt that by the end, I was like, okay, I'm kind of done with this
Yeah,
music.
there was maybe wasn't enough variety to it. Like,
Yeah.
I wanted to feel like I knew what was happening during certain scenes a little bit better. There's
Oh,
some
that's a
movies.
good point. That's a very good point. I think I didn't say that, but I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, because it's always the same thing, right? And a great soundtrack kind of like informs you what's going to happen or what is happening because it is different, and you can hear it in the music, and in this case you couldn't.
Right. Like you can have me listen to different songs from Lord of the Rings and I can tell you which scene it was.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah,
You
that's a
know,
perfect
so
soundtrack.
I feel like the good movie soundtracks, we're not getting a lot of them actually with a lot of blockbusters. Like, you know, there's only a couple times in recent history where I feel like I can tell you when something was happening. And so this is maybe a weakness of the film. While there were certain scenes where I felt like, oh, there's some powerful stuff going on. I can't single it out as well
Well,
as like,
that's it's impossible to single it out
yeah,
because it's essentially the same thing throughout the whole movie.
yeah. And
So it's
maybe,
very difficult.
and that is, I think, a valid criticism is that there's a lot of sameness going on in the movie. As
Yeah.
good as the stuff they do, like I actually told people, we could have used some levity at times, like a
Hmm.
little more humor. The only humorous thing I remember is the little bunny rabbit creature, like that they find in the Dune. I was like, oh, that was pretty funny, but like
Yeah.
it
You
is
know,
kind of dour at times. Like,
it
oh,
is. Yeah. Like I felt that I it was enlightening to me to watch the 80s movie
mm,
before the podcast because that kind of like showed me a little bit like the things that I thought the new movie were good at and the things that the new movie is not good at. It becomes clear when you watch the 80s movie because you then can compare it to the how David Lynch did it, and it becomes clear. um so the pace, the I didn't quite have this memory, but the David Lynch's movie, the biggest problem with the movie is actually the pace.
mm.
Like the pace is really all over the place in
Well, and
that
all the action is done in a montage, at some point.
Yeah, true. Yeah. And that's part of it, right? And it's just a very wrong pace, and it's very badly done. It's like it hasn't really it was like it's almost like he was making this movie, and then at some point he realized that he wasn't going to have enough time to tell the story, and he just told the whole story basically through montage in the last 20 minutes or so.
You're not
I
wrong. He's actually disowned the movie since because, and he declared the source material unfilmable. Um,
Well, that's one way to go about it. Another way to go about it is that, yeah, I mean, it just wasn't a very good work by him,
yeah.
and I think it didn't suit him as well. It was a weird choice, David
Well,
Lynch for Dune.
I
That's a
think
very
if you
weird
given
choice.
him like a 10-hour, 10 episode thing to work with, it maybe could have worked because David Lynch is a weird guy. He's
Yeah.
artistic and
Well,
he,
that's his defining characteristic.
yeah, I mean, he's a painter who makes weird stuff.
Yeah.
But then again, I like his weird stuff. Usually, I like Twin Peaks.
Well, I'm not a big fan, but I appreciate what he does, you know, and there it just it doesn't suit my I guess my taste, but a lot of people like him. That's fine. I mean, I think there's a place for David Lynch for sure. I just don't think like it matches well with Dune. I think
Right.
Villeneuve, for example, is a much better
I
match.
think though what he did well was a little bit more of the levity, but that might have also been brought by having characters like God, I keep on forgetting what's the name of the other nephew that Sting played. Like having him around
Yeah.
adds a little bit more of a contrast in character, adds some more levity.
It does. It does. And you're right. And in that sense, the 80s movies is actually superior because it does have more of a diversity in terms of mood while you're watching the movie. Yeah, you do get the levity, you do get the
Whereas
humor,
there's just a
and
constant like
yeah,
dourness in this one that
true.
I think
Yes.
can bring people down, especially if you have such a long movie. And it makes me hope that when maybe what they'll do with the second part when he's with the Fremen
Yeah.
is to really like add a different energy to it. And
Hopefully. Yeah. But I guess I didn't complete my thought in terms of the pace.
but
Yeah.
sorry, I interrupted you.
No, no, it wasn't your fault. It was actually me just getting caught up in the 80s movie. But I actually meant to say like Denis Villeneuve, he doesn't really have a good pace either in that movie. Like that I think that was the biggest problem with the movies, that he is not as bad as David Lynch, but he also doesn't get it right. You know, like it's almost the opposite. You know, David Lynch was too inconsistent, you know, and it's like the movie is not very long. Even David Lynch's movie is only, it's a little bit over 2 hours, which
Right,
is, and very badly paced on top of that. So that's like, that's not really how you can adapt Dune properly, you know, because like it's completely, the pace is completely wrong, and then on top of that it's too small, you know, too slow. It was never really going to work properly. You really need at least 3 hours for to tell that story properly. But I think if you, that this is like what I got, I guess the biggest thing that I was thinking while I was watching the movie is that you could have done this in one movie, and I think it would have been honestly a much more satisfying movie if you had done just an epic 3 hour movie, because a lot of the scenes in this movie are pretty slow. You know, it moves pretty slow. He doesn't really give us a lot of background details. He doesn't really explain the motivations behind the characters' actions all that well. You know, and you can do that fairly fast. It's not like in a TV show, but good movies, they do that pretty well. You know, that you don't use a lot of time, but you do explain things in an efficient manner. Like for example, I watched Gladiator, and that's not a very long movie. You know, Gladiator is like 2 hours and maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 2.5 hours at most. Honestly, Gladiator, every single scene is serving a purpose.
right,
And you understand the characters right away. You know, it takes, you know, that's a Ridley Scott's one of the best directors, and I think that's his best movie. But like he's so on point with that movie. Like in every scene, like he's establishing something. You know, he's either establishing the character's motivation, the relationship between the characters. Like he introduces a nice action set piece that moves the story. But every scene serves a purpose. Like in this movie, a lot of scenes don't really serve a purpose. Like there are scenes that, you know, it's basically him dreaming for like 15 minutes, and then you end up with a very long movie, which is like 2.5 hours to tell a story that is actually not a whole lot happens
right.
in this movie. So I think it would have been much better if he had done maybe a longer movie, like 3 hours, but actually tell a complete story, a cohesive story, a satisfying story. Because I'm okay now that we know that there's a part two. So at least he's gonna finish the story. But to be, and this is my biggest uh, criticism of the movie, is that it really feels very incomplete. And a lot of people maybe will say, well, yeah, but it's not complete. It's only part one. But I think that's not really how a movie's supposed to work. You know,
And
it's
I
supposed to be
agree.
satisfying. You know, it's supposed to be stand on its own. And this one doesn't. It really doesn't.
No, I completely agree. And this is, I think, more true to the point that David Lynch made, is that if you wanted to do this as a movie, it's hard, but I think you would have to do is you'd have to make this a single narrative following Paul Atreides, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and
And
through
you
his
could do it. You could do it. It would be a good movie. I like if you say, well, you can't adapt, A Song of Ice and Fire, fair enough. It's not possible,
but that's why you had to do it as a
Exactly. That's the only way you can do
no.
it.
The only
But
way to fully do Dune, if they want to do it properly, I think would have to be like how they did Game of Thrones. You have
yeah,
to let it have time to just, spread it out.
but the difference is that with Dune, at least, I think you can have a good movie. You just tell Paul Atreides' story, and that's a pretty compelling story, and that would be the core of the book. That would be the core of the narrative, and that would still be pretty good. I think that would have been a better approach than to make this two-part, thing that the movie kind of like stops. When it starts to get good, that's when it stops,
Yeah, it
unfortunately.
basically starts at the beginning of the second act.
Hmm. That's when it stops. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this, because if you think about it, let's think about what a proper movie structure should be, where you have three acts.
Exactly.
Now,
Yeah.
nowadays, most blockbusters actually only have two acts. The way they go is you have the first act, which is the setup, and then you have the middle that just crescendos up down towards an end. There's no second act really, second and
Yeah.
third act. But if
I
you,
agree.
but this movie, for the most part, is like a prologue,
It's Act One. It's Act
and
One
then
of a clearly three-act story, because Dune is actually, unlike the sequels. I mean, Dune is a very well structured three-act story, and
yeah,
this is the first act essentially.
yeah, and so when you try to create a movie out of one act, you have to, like, we have to think, what are the two acts? You really, that beginning part on Caladan leading up to getting to Arrakis would be your first act, and the second act would be the adjusting leading, and then the invasion or the downfall of House Treaties, and then the third act is what, like, them basically just escaping to the final climax fight. And so you can see how they put it together, but you're still left with feeling that like you didn't quite get your first, second, and third act. He did his
It
best,
feels very unresolved.
right? Because think about it, like, as we were saying before, like, if we just did the Paul Atreides story, um,
I think it's completely doable. If you do, you keep the core of the narrative, and it's very doable in 3 hours. Because it's actually a very, like I said, it's a very structured story at its core. The first act, it's basically what we just saw in this movie. The characters are introduced. Sort of like the intrigue is introduced. They go to the planet. They go to Dune, and eventually they get backstabbed, and Paul has to flee with his mother, and they're able to escape. That's first act. Then the second act is he meets the free man, and he basically explores that civilization and becomes, well, sorry, spoiler alert if you're watching this and you haven't read the book, but basically it's his climb in Freeman civilization and becoming like a leader for them. And then you have the third act, which is when everything kind of comes together. He's like the leader of the Freeman. He leads the rebellion, and you get like the final confrontation. Classic, very classic third act.
yeah.
So you can do that in a movie. It just needs to be an epic movie. But look, Gladiator is 2.5 hours long. It's an epic story as well, and it
and
works very well.
you mostly are only with Russell Crowe, that movie.
Yes. If you do just one main character and you tell the story from his perspective, you don't really need all that much time.
Yeah. And that's where, you know, again, why different forms of media serve a purpose for how they're done. Like, if you're telling a expansive multi-narrative story like Dune, like
That would work perfectly as well, but you need an HBO show, right?
right, we'll see. I wonder, like, if he does do three movies ending with Messiah, if after that they just go to series for like Children of Dune, which Children of Dune I think would not work well as a movie.
No, I don't think any of the sequels would work. Perhaps Messiah if he does a part three, but after that, I think,
Yeah,
yeah,
although there's some weird stuff I remember from Children of Dune.
yeah,
I forget, doesn't somebody turn into a sandworm?
yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I think that's essentially, yeah, the emperor merges with the sandworm and becomes immortal. Yeah,
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
something like that.
spoilers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually telling Lauren we might want to reread some of these things. But anyway,
But
but
it's
like,
very different, like Dune, the original story is actually, it's the classic, in a sense. It's the classic. It's what inspired Star Wars, really. Its biggest influence. It's the classic. What is it called? That book, that famous book, that basically the hero's journey, right?
oh, the Joseph Campbell one.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a classic story like that.
they all go back to Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, but Dune is an excellent example of that. It's basically about this hero. And I think, I don't know about this because I'm just speculating, but that's what kind of like what I get from the story. I think Muhammad was probably a big influence for him.
Very much so. I mean, the name for the leader Al-Mahib
Yeah.
is very much inspiration from that. I will say that Herbert was very interested in the hero, in the emergence of a hero. And this is where I kind of do a little tangent, but to talk about another similar series around the same time, but
Foundation.
Foundation by Asimov, which they're trying to do a show for that now and doing terrible with it.
Yeah. Have you seen that show? It's absolutely horrible.
Right. Well, here's the reason why. Like they literally, so it's like 9 or 10 books, but the Asimov did not care about heroes. This was every book is another 100 years in the history of trying to rebuild an empire, and so you can't stretch any of those books out. Like there's not much, and they're trying to, and it's boring and not good. But like that's how you don't adapt a series, is not understand what it's all about. Um, I mean, that one actually truly might be unfilmable because
Yeah,
no
I
one
think
wants
so.
to see like
I haven't read the books, but from what I've read about the books, it seems to me that that's not a good story to adapt, that because it's never going to work in a
right.
film format or a TV show. But
Well,
I actually, when I read the reviews for the first couple episodes of Foundation, some reviewers were saying that it was fantastic. So I was actually pretty excited about that, and I watched it with the same friend actually, that I watched Dune at his place, and we also watched it as a movie, with the projector and everything, and it was just like probably the worst TV show I've seen in a long time. In I It's so bad. I was shocked. I because I don't understand how anyone would review that positively.
well, I think, and my point, and to come to the point on how narratives work and why Herbert sort of put this together almost as a counter to Foundation, is that when you want to film something and have a story to tell, you need, unless you're really good at a macro storytelling, which is very hard to do. I think only really Game of Thrones pulled that off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
it's very hard. Yeah.
you need to have you need to have a story to follow, and there's
Yeah.
no, and so, and then you need that compelling character to follow, and so Dune has that in spades. Foundation doesn't. And so this is why it's interesting to me that both came out this year, and both are sort of contrasted in their own times as well. And we're seeing like both were also considered unfilmable.
Yeah.
Well, we have a very passable and enjoyable version, albeit incomplete.
Yeah.
I can say
And I think that's not entirely what you're saying is accurate, but it's not entirely accurate that it's unfilmable. I think Foundation, yes, maybe, probably,
I
but
said
Dune,
consider.
yeah, no, I know, and but yeah, I don't think it's difficult, sure, but it's like Watchmen, right? I mean, they made a pretty good movie. Well, some people don't think it's a good movie,
Oh, I
but
don't.
sure, yeah, fair enough. But it's a decent attempt at least, like, even if you didn't like it, right? I mean, it does tell a story, and like it's somewhat cohesive. It's not like even Lord of the Rings was said to be unfilmable.
Well, I think
And look at Lord of the Rings. I mean, it's
Lord of the
fantastic.
Rings was considered unfilmable because they didn't believe they had the resources
Okay,
like for years to be able to pull it off because
sure. And
there was just
that's
so
that was probably true, right? Yeah.
right. But like and honestly, Dune might have finally caught up to a place where they could do it. You know, and that's part of the reason why this it works maybe in these days is that you can do things and do it so well. Like the personal shields, I always felt like, man, I don't know how they'd pull it off, but they really did a good job in
They
this.
did
And
a great job. Yeah.
like
I mean,
those,
visually, he did a great job with everything. In the '80s, that's probably the worst single aspect of a
oh yeah,
movie
those like the weird
visually.
blocky thing. Yeah.
Oh my God, it was it looks like a video game from the '80s.
Yeah. And
Not in a good way. Certainly not in a good way. In a very bad way.
right. And like the winged ships were really cool. Actually, all the giant ships were cool. And what I really liked was just how they did. I mean, this is probably the easiest thing for them to do, given, we're how many years from the Matrix, but the anti-gravity movement
Mm-hmm.
was done perfectly.
Yeah.
Like even for the Baron, which I feel bad for Stellan Skarsgård for that. He had to do 8 hours of prosthetics and makeup for this movie. He's 70 years old, the man.
Well,
This
he probably got paid pretty handsomely. So yeah, it's okay. Don't feel too bad for him. But yeah, you can feel a little bit.
what was funny when I told people, oh, it was Stellan Skarsgård, it was like, oh yeah, man, he looks so much older than I remember. But yeah, that same nose and face. I'm like, wait. Are you thinking his son, Alexander Skarsgård from True Blood? It's like, yeah, like no. This is Stellan Skarsgård's 7-year-old
Yeah.
father. Well, it would have been kind of interesting. Oh,
I
that's
mean,
who they could get.
honestly, I wouldn't recognize him. I mean, I,
That's who
I
they
I
could
know it's him, but I would never recognize him.
that's who they could get to play the other nephew, is Stellan Skarsgård.
Oh, that would be good.
Or not Stellan, Alexander Skarsgård, his son.
That's good casting.
Or even Bill, the other son, the one who was in It. He played Pennywise in It. Like, because yeah,
I don't really know much about the other one, the other son. So
he's got a really creepy smile because, of course, he was Pennywise. So.
yeah, yeah.
But I think you do
I
need
don't
the
know.
charismatic, the really handsome charisma, and you could really
Yeah,
get that with Alexander Skarsgård. Ooh, that's a
that
hmm.
would that would be a very good
He
casting
hasn't
choice, I
really
think.
done a big movie though. Like I don't know, like he's done a
Well,
lot of
he's a kind of a big actor.
on TV. He does a lot of good TV shows.
He did, he was supposed to be he was the main character in Tarzan, I think. But that kind of flopped, but it was a big movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd still like it. I think he'd be a good choice, but
And he's not the main character. I mean, if he does that character, that's a fairly secondary character.
yeah, I'm just thinking like the type of character you need sort of that lore, like kind of treacherous, but like charismatic. And he kind of does that in True Blood.
Yeah, no, I think he would be good. I think that would be a very good character for him. Yeah.
Yeah, I should tell Lauren that, and she would probably like that'd be perfect.
Yeah, and also he has, I think that's the only thing from the '80s movie that I think it would be cool to try
Missing.
to kind of like imitate almost, or at least remind people of that Sting performance, because that's
Yeah,
so
and the
iconic.
princess too. We are missing the emperor. Yeah,
And the princess, I think that that is another thing in which I think the '80s movie is actually a lot better. The princess narrating the film. I think that that introduces the story a lot better. You know, it's more clear what's going on, and it's also there's a mood to it, right? The princess talking in the beginning, and she's talking about the spice, the melange, and everything. You know, like setting up this intergalactic intrigue, and you know, she's good looking, you know, very, you know, beautiful and regal. I think that that introduces the movie in a better way, and more clear as well.
Well, and also it was played by Virginia Madsen in the old movie, and so like, great actress. So,
Well, I don't know much about it. What was she in?
shoot, like
I know she's obviously
Sideways, Prairie Home Companion.
she's I mean she's very beautiful, certainly.
Yeah, no, she's just got like, shoot, like trying to think, like what's I'm drawing some of my friends are gonna hate me on
Man,
that.
by the way, your eyes look very blue. They look like Freeman eyes.
Yeah,
Even in that light, yeah,
it might be my new
you
camp.
look,
It
yeah,
might be
you
my new.
look like a Freeman for a while.
It could also be the fact that I like have a really black shirt on, and so like
No,
it's.
but they don't look like that now. But I think it was the light.
Oh yeah, sometimes maybe.
It gave you a proper Freeman look for.
Well, I am a Middle Eastern man with blue eyes, so I could be
Well,
fair.
there you go, there you go.
I
but it
mean, they
was
were modeled off the.
you didn't even need makeup if with that
Right.
light on, you know, reflecting in your eyes.
But yeah, no. So that's another person I think that should be in the next movie, and I wonder who they could cast for that.
Who?
Like
Oh,
Princess Azulan.
the princess. Yeah.
Not Irulan. I said Azulan. That's from
Well,
Avatar. But
yeah. No, I think the that she's a fairly. Honestly, I don't think she's that important in the story. I think as a narrator, she would be a lot more important. But unfortunately, there's no backtracking there. I mean, if she's not in the first movie, you can't really use her as a narrator anymore. So that's
yeah,
kind of gone. He kind of like basically, you know, kind of like screwed that part. Um, yeah,
well, I think it's all
there's
about. I mean,
not much you can do to fix that.
right. I mean, Chani basically took her. Well, maybe they sort of combined her with Chani.
Yeah, it's
Or
possible.
maybe
But
they, yeah.
the other nephew, you could still give him a pretty big part in the second movie.
Oh yeah,
Um,
definitely. I mean, I think you need him.
yeah, and I think he's a big part of the story, right? I mean, in the book at least, he's like the villain in a sense. You know, he's not the villain, but he's one of the villains.
Well, he's sort of like, he's the villain of the villains and of the heroes. Like he's,
Mhm.
treacherous. He's someone, he's that character who you can totally see ally and then totally see like, stab, the heroes in the back and everything.
He's like he's the closest from the other side. He's the closest to Paul Atreides, right? Because he's like this captivating, this charismatic, young hero.
Well,
But
maybe maybe that's
He's a Harkonnen hero, which means he's basically a son of a bitch, right? But he's a very charismatic
well,
son of a
maybe
bitch.
that's why they withheld him because you could almost start off the next movie creating the new hero for Harkonnen, and you set up sort of the parallels between him and Paul Atreides.
Yeah, that's a good point. That would be a good angle for
That'd
part
be a
two.
good, and that'd be a good way if you want to build up to a climax that then sets up a third movie that maybe goes into Messiah and uses that as well. So yeah, I mean, I feel that Denny Villeneuve really wants to do this. And so I feel like he's got the passion for it. So I'm excited. But definitely we need the other nephew. What is his name?
Yeah, and I will say, you know, the one good thing that might come out of the fact that he divided it into two movies, and even though this movie is kind of slow, and the second one, well, the second one needs to pack more story though, if he wants to tell the story correctly. So I think that's a good thing actually, because the second movie will have to tell more things. We'll have to incorporate more things into the story, I think.
Mhm.
But he says that he wants to do a third movie, so that's kind of a good thing. because if he goes for the trilogy, we'll get to see Messiah, and I think that I actually really like that novel. I think that's a pretty cool sequel to Dune, and I like how Dune is a very classic hero story, but Messiah then is really the
Yeah.
dark side. It's the subversion of the hero story, and I like to see that. That would
Yeah, that'd
be
be
that would be
cool.
cool.
I just looked it up. The other nephew's name is Fayed,
Yeah,
and yeah, this is and I wonder if they're going to also put more of the conniving and sort of trickery that the Baron has, and put more onto him, like have him like be more of like the actual villain.
yeah. I think that's I don't know. I hope Danny Villeneuve listens to us on
Yeah.
this one.
Well,
No, I
I
think I
should
think that would be the way to go. I think the way that he did things. I mean, I've said this before, but several times already. But yeah, I think he kind of like screwed up the pacing of the story and stuff. But I think if you're gonna, I think that's a great idea, the one that you had. Like that's how you introduce part two, and you make it sort of even more cohesive. It's like you make the parallel, the hero of the Harkonnen and the hero of the Freemen, and
right, because they
slash
need
slash
some complexity to
a
the
treaty.
Harkonnens at this point. The Harkonnens sort of were just like
Yeah,
like white devils, you know.
yeah, and I think that's great. He's the hero of the Harkonnen. Yeah, because you can't. Nobody's gonna cheer, for the Baron. I mean, he's a despicable character. Even in this version, he's pretty despicable. And the other nephew as well. I mean, it's not someone that you're gonna cheer for. But if you propose like this interesting, charismatic, villainous type, for the Harkonnen, I think, yeah, you can get behind it, especially if it's a good-looking guy like,
Alexander Skarsgård. The only
yeah,
issue is that he's a lot older than Timothy Chalamet, and Fayed is supposed to be about the same age as Paul.
yeah, that's a problem. But I guess you make him look a little younger, but that is a
Or you
problem.
don't care and you just figure the hero
Yeah,
is
it's
older.
fine.
Yeah,
Look at Peter Pan and Captain Hook. They're not precisely the same age, and they
yeah.
still work perfectly as nemesis.
You lose a little bit of the parallel between the two though,
You
if you
do,
go
you
that
do,
route.
yeah.
But
It's not perfect. I think it's good casting, but it's not perfect. You would need to find someone that age. You're right.
yeah, how old is Bill, the younger brother? Bill Skarsgård.
Maybe that's the answer. Yeah.
He's 31. You could probably
Not
do.
bad. Not bad. You probably want someone in their 20s, but 31 is not too
Oh, but
bad.
he might be busy because he's filming John Wick Chapter 4.
All right. Yeah, well, there are lots of great actors out there, so I'm sure they'll be able. They should find someone blonde though.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Give us a little bit of a reenactment of
they'll be
Sting.
bald, so it doesn't matter. If they're going by the way they're portraying all of the Harkonnens in this one, they're all bald. So
Oh, really? Oh, we're gonna miss out on that blonde hair, Sting's blonde
right, but
hair.
like I know we're missing out on that, but like I mean, everyone the Harkonnens are all bald this time, right? This is what it seems like.
Well, yeah, I mean, might be. Yeah, I don't know. You might have. You're probably right. Yeah, it's a shame, but you're probably right.
Yeah, miss out on the yeah.
What about? I guess. Yeah, we covered. I think pretty much everything. What did you think of Zendaya? Apparently, she's a big thing. Like a lot of people were excited
I
about
mean,
her,
we
but
didn't get enough of her, and I think that's why we got a lot of those visions to like really give her more to do in this.
yeah,
But I'll wait and see more. I mean, I think she is a talented actress. I just need her to do more in this, and that might we have to wait for the next movie for that.
yeah, she was barely in it. The thing that kind of like concerned me is like in one interview, Denis Villeneuve said that the part two is Zendaya's movie, and that is or Cheney's movie, or and that I was a little bit confused by that. I
Well,
hope
because I mean,
not,
she's
because that's
gonna be
not really
there.
the story.
Well, I think what he means is that she's not really in the first one, but she's in pretty much probably almost every scene along with Paul in the next one.
I hope that's what he means. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like how you think that like Leia is not really in that much of the first Star Wars movie. She's not
Yeah,
like, and not as
she's, I don't know.
right, but like she is the second main character of Empire Strikes Back. Like her journey, because it's the parallel of Luke and Leia's journeys within Empire
Hmm.
Strikes Back. And
Yeah,
so by that, you could say that the big change for Empire is
yeah,
to,
I get it now. Yeah,
that's what
yeah,
I, now I think part of it is Danny Villeneuve might be excited because I think Zendaya is a good actress. And so I think they're waiting and they're really excited to be able to have her flex in the next movie.
hmm. I mean, she's an important character in the second part of the story, so I hope she's good in it. Um,
Yeah. I
and
mean,
the
she has it right
cast
now.
the
She's
cast
doing
was
well.
very good in the first movie, so I think the cast will be probably very strong in the second movie as well.
It was kind of funny. Like as we were getting ready to watch it, we got the previews, and of course they had the Spider-Man movie preview with Zendaya in that as well. So I was
Yeah,
like, getting a lot of Zendaya today.
is it Zendaya or Zendaya?
I think Zendaya.
Zendaya, okay.
I know I want to pronounce it Zendaya, but I think it's Zendaya. I could be
Well,
wrong, but
it's fine. I mean, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Well, do you want to mention anything else? I think this was we can even talk a little bit more after this, but I think for the podcast, I think we kind of like covered everything
yeah,
doing related.
I'm excited for where it goes. Obviously, this wasn't perfect. Um, it's weird in the day and age when we saw how well Lord of the Rings did with filming everything back to back, and then they were
Yeah.
able to re-edit all three movies and see what worked best in that three part movies. That they didn't do it here, but no one else has done what Lord of the Rings did, even so we can't expect everybody to do that.
Yeah.
But overall, I gave it like a solid B plus. I'm happy with where it was at, and I hope they hit a home run for the next one.
Yeah, I'll give it a 7 out of 10.
Yeah,
I think it was strong. It was a strong well, not strong, but it was a good adaptation. It was a decent adaptation. Strong would be like an 8, I think. Like I think that I think that it really doesn't stand on its own. And it was not satisfying to me as a Dune fan, as someone who it's probably my favorite sci-fi novel. I think it's a fantastic story, but it really is an adaptation of the first act of a
yeah,
story. And that is very hard to make that satisfying, you
yeah. I
know.
would say you could almost grade this as a entertaining incomplete.
Yes, and I know there's another part. Well, now we know there's another part for sure. And it's great, but it almost feels like, well, not almost. It certainly feels like it would be more fun to watch them, back to back, and you get
Yeah,
the
and I
whole
wonder
story,
like
right?
once it's done, and is that's what I'm going to do is
Yeah, me
I wonder
too.
if I wonder if there will be theaters that will like, hey, we're gonna hold a double feature showing
Double feature, that would be perfect.
where
Do a
you have
double feature,
intermission.
yeah.
I'm like, I'll totally go do that.
It's almost, this reminds me of Harry Potter, when they made that
Yeah,
seventh book, and they divided into two parts. And then I remember watching the first part and thinking, well, this is kind of like crap,
right.
because you just watch the first part of the book. I had read the book, I'm a big Harry Potter fan. So,
And they
but
did that
it's
with the
not
Hobbit
it's not
too.
good, like you watch the first part of the story, it's really just you want to watch the next part. It's just not a satisfying thing.
And same thing with the Hobbit when they did that in the three movies.
And
Like
the
that.
Hobbit, and I'm gonna kind of like use, actually, the Hobbit is a good example, because sometimes I think some stories actually work better if you condense them and you tell them, yeah, maybe you need to go a little fast, but they just work so much. I mean, The Hobbit would have been a fantastic movie if it had been one movie, but three movies was like too boring, like he had to spend way too much time, and none of the parts, not part one, not part two, not part three, they never really worked as a story. And it would have worked, I think, fantastically well as one movie.
I have a friend who recut all three movies together in his own personal cut of one movie. And when I saw what it is, like, yeah, there's some rough cuts because
Yeah,
obviously he doesn't have the negatives and all that stuff. But I was like, well, this would have been more fun.
this would have been a lot more fun. The book is fun, the movies are very well made. It's just that they're too, I think we need to revisit, what it means to be, to what a film is, what a movie is in cinema, the theatrical experience. I think one thing that we've kind of lost it, in this era of television and streaming. Like, even like some of these big movies, they don't really feel like movies anymore. They feel like very incomplete, like part of a franchise.
Yeah,
And in this case it's particularly bad because it doesn't, you don't even have a coherent, like a complete story, I should say, complete story. you know it really feels really just like part of the story, and that is not, if at the end of the day you want to go to the movie theater, you want to sit down and you want to watch like a play, like that's the experience, right? You want to watch the whole story, if it's, especially if it's a dramatic story, you want to watch the whole thing unfold. You want to see
yeah,
the acts unfold, like follow each other and build to a climax. And that's when you get the satisfaction. But if you just go and you watch the first act, I mean, that's not going to give you that experience.
yeah. I think that's a great point to end it on too. That, like, you know, it's a good discussion to think about as we get into other things down the line. Is that, like, are we sort of like not in, like, in terms of the blockbuster movie, some of the smaller scale movies, they still do it right, but like the big stuff right now can be kind of unsatisfying because we don't have the climaxes yet. And we shall see if we get that satisfaction with the next one.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll end this here. Do you have any last thoughts?
No, I think
If
we,
not, we'll just thank you for watching, and
yeah,
we'll be back with a different movie. Maybe The Matrix, or maybe something sooner.
yeah. Is the Matrix in December?
December, I think. Maybe we'll try to do one before that.